Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Cluster 6 Info Days. After a good and smooth session yesterday, this is the second part dedicated to research and innovation actions within the destination Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. If you missed the first part, you can still watch all the video recordings in the Horizon Europe Info Days site. My name is Philippe Julkens. I'm the acting head of unit of the Climate and Planetary Boundaries unit in DG Research and Innovation. And I'm here together with Anne Buril, advisor in DG Environment. We will moderate the session. Please note that we would like to invite you, participants from all over the EU and way beyond, to ask questions during the presentation using Slido and to upvote the questions that you consider most interesting. These are the ways you will see on your screen. These are the ways to access Slido. You go to www.sli.do, insert the code #CL6InfoDay to join the event, and then select the room of the destination, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Or you can simply scan the QR code and select the appropriate room. To facilitate moderation of the Q&A, when you ask a question, we would like to request you to label the question with a topic number. For example, if you are interested in aspects related to the topic Horizon CL6 2021 Biodiv 0119, a mechanism for science to inform implementation, please put simply the number 19 on your question. We will take as many questions as possible, given the time, of course. However, if due to time constraints, some questions will remain unanswered, please send them to the Research Enquiry Service. We will reply there in written to all questions. The most relevant and most frequent question will be included also in the frequently asked question section. During the session, we will favor questions related to the topics themselves. Please note that general questions related to Cluster 6, evaluation, and others should have been already addressed in the plenary session. To warm up on Slido, we would like to ask you a question related to what brought you here. So here's the question: what topics in the destination Biodiversity are you most interested in? We will leave you answering the Slido poll and come back later for your answers. Thank you for your active participation and most welcome to the session. I will now give the floor to my colleague Anne Buril to continue this introduction. Please, Anne.
Good morning, everyone. As Philippe has said, my name is Anne Burrell. I'm the advisor for natural capital in DG Environment. As I'm sure you know, in this session, we will complete the overview of the calls in 2021 within the destination Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Yesterday, most topics in the three first headings of the biodiversity destination were presented, along with general information about impacts and budget. If you missed yesterday's session, I invite you to watch the recordings on the Info Days site from tomorrow on. Today, we're going to focus on the last two headings on the right of this slide. So that would be the headings Enabling a Transformative Change on Biodiversity, and the category Interconnecting Biodiversity Research and Supporting Policies. Our colleagues will briefly present to you the 2021 topics that are organized in the work program under these two headings. And we will also present today the topic on biodiversity and pandemics that couldn't be streamed yesterday due to a technical problem. Science and policy clearly underline that biodiversity loss can only be successfully addressed by transforming our society into a more sustainable one. Such transformative change must decrease the impacts of indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, which are in turn underpinned by societal values and behaviors. There's, however, hardly any knowledge on potentials and challenges arising from transitions such as this focused on biodiversity. Therefore, we propose the fourth heading in our destination, Enabling Transformative Change in Biodiversity, which is at the core of the objectives of the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. This destination contains 4 topics in 2021, aiming to initiate processes, behavioral changes, and actions which are transforming the way we have an impact on biodiversity. This heading will fund socioeconomic and multidisciplinary research, including on the role of education, to develop knowledge and tools for biodiversity policymaking, and to accelerate transformative changes in our society that are relevant to biodiversity. The 5th heading, Interconnecting Biodiversity Research and Supporting Policies, refers to the establishment of the European Partnership Rescuing Biodiversity to Safeguard Life on Earth, and to the support for other science policy interfaces. These interfaces can be used as structured policy input to the research cycle, as well as to guide biodiversity governance, and more generally, to implement the EU Green Deal and international conventions. Philippe showed yesterday the general policy context of the biodiversity destination, mainly focused on the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 and the expected impacts for all the destination. I think we should be on the next slide, please. Let me now just highlight the 2 impacts directly related to the topics to be presented today, which are strongly related to policy. Proposals addressing topics in headings 4 and 5 should at least contribute specifically to one of the following impacts. First, approaches for enabling transformative changes in society are developed and should contribute to ensuring that the do not harm biodiversity principle becomes mainstreamed in all sectors. Second, biodiversity research is interconnected across Europe, supporting national, EU, and international policies. We should also notice that there are 2 distinct calls. They're labeled BioDiv 01 and BioDiv 02. This is because the European Biodiversity Partnership has a call of its own, the number 02, with an earlier deadline, which will allow member states to launch their own co-funded call within the partnership before the end of this year. Back to you, Philippe.
Thank you very much, Anne. Next slide, please. After this introduction, we will present all the topics in 2 batches. But first, I would like to briefly see the results of the Slido poll. The question was, what are the most interesting topics for you in the biodiversity destination? We see that topics 15, 20, and 17 have the highest rate of replies, but I should flag that the number of replies is low and it's probably insignificant. I don't know, with all respect for the 5 who replied, of course, but statistically, I meant significant. I think to have a more representative result, we need more votes. I hope it's not because there are some technical difficulties to follow on Slido, and we will proceed. And good to know that these topics already raised some interest. After each batch of topics presentation, we will open the Q&A discussion on Slido, as mentioned earlier. I strongly encourage you to take the opportunity of getting input for the topic writers. We will take as many questions as possible given the time. We are working in virtual form, but through the Slido, we can make these sessions more lively and you can have the answers to the question you have on these topics. Some questions may remain unanswered. Please send your question to the Research Inquiry Service. We will reply in written. The replies will be then publicly available, and the most frequently asked question will be on the frequently asked question section. Next slide. I would like to have your attention in a moment to listen to Transformative Change series of presentation for topics under the heading number 4, and we will then open the Q&A session through Slido. But first, as promised yesterday, we will finally watch the topic number 11, presented by Josefina and Fedeke, about the connection between biodiversity, pandemics, and epidemic risk. I would like to encourage participants to start asking questions in the Slido preceded by the topic number. Already during the presentation, Slido will remain open for the whole session. Josefina, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Josefina Anfedake, Senior Expert for Biodiversity Research at DG Research and Innovation, and I'm going to explain the topic, what else is out there? Exploring the connection between biodiversity, ecosystem services, pandemics, and epidemics risk. This is a topic for research and innovation actions. And the policy context is the same as the rest of the biodiversity destination, the European Green Deal priorities and the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, but in this case, it also includes supporting EU response to the coronavirus and other zoonotic outbreaks, supporting the EU goal of leading just digital economic and ecological transitions that will leave no one behind. It's also supporting the One Health, EcoHealth, and the future European Health Union, and some of the impacts contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation and to a resilient EU prepared for emerging threats, impacts in Horizon Europe. The expected outcomes of these projects are very wide, and no single project is meant to address all of them. Proposals could address some of them, not all. For example, the evolution and spread of microbiomes in the wild and the relationship with biodiversity loss in socioeconomic, health, resilience, and climate context. This is one of the main outcomes, and at least some aspect of it should be addressed. Also, mapping and forecasting epidemic risks in the context of land use, ecology, climate, biodiversity, and socioeconomic factors. Projects should produce novel technologies, studying land use, environmental, biodiversity management, and prevention mitigation strategies. Should also identify and, for example, characterize in a molecular way potential pathogens and their hosts for use as preleads in future vaccines and antimicrobials, and perhaps developing rapid pathogen detection and surveillance for novel pathogens, and taking into account human populations, reservoirs, and vectors. They should include multidisciplinary collaborations and include the participation of local and indigenous communities. The scope in these slides is very, very wide. Wildlife microbiomes, the potential to spread by crossing interspecies barriers, eventually reaching humans, are still largely unknown. We know with the example of the current coronavirus that zoonoses have links with human disturbance, with land use change, with natural habitat degradation, loss of biodiversity, climate change. Zoonotic diseases are 17% of all infectious diseases, and in a normal year, they cause 700,000 deaths per year, which can double or triple in pandemic years. So these projects should help recovering biodiversity and ecosystem services, whilst at the same time predicting and preventing future pandemics and epidemic outbreaks, especially in tropical areas and biodiversity hotspots. Collaboration between environmental, ecological, biomedical, public health, animal health, and social sciences, including climate change, should be necessary to map, to identify, and to characterize potential emerging pathogens, the dynamics of these ecosystems, and their hosts and vectors in human changed or natural areas. They should also contribute to pathogen discovery, prophylaxis, and operational surveillance strategies, and to build risk maps. Also to early warning. These projects necessarily need to involve a wide range of disciplines and stakeholders: ecologists, infectious disease researchers, medical doctors, veterinarians, environmental, public health experts, socioeconomic stakeholders, private sector, local communities, SMEs, to track the risk of pathogens and to link it to the changes in the habitat and in the ecosystems. The indicative budget for this topic is 12 million euro, and we expect 2 or 3 projects between 4 and 6 million euro each. They should be focused on biodiversity hotspots, so international cooperation of non-EU countries that can be reservoir for future epidemic risk is encouraged. It's very important to involve social sciences and humanities, and the outputs of this project, like others in this destination, need to contribute to the EC Knowledge Center for Biodiversity. There should be important synergies with the Biodiversity Partnership and contribution to IPES. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josefina, for this presentation. We have caught up now from yesterday's, and the next series of 4 topics, all presented by my colleague Marco Fritz, is all about transformative change and how to decrease the impact of indirect drivers of biodiversity loss. These indirect drivers have been identified by IPES, among others, and we refer to them in the work program as production and consumption patterns, human population dynamics and trends, including their footprints, trade, technological innovations, and local to global governance, including financing. The 4 topics that will be presented by Marco address different aspects of those drivers. They are interconnected and form a research portfolio with identical policy context. This is why in the presentation of the first one about trade and value chains, Marco develops this policy context that applies to the 4 topics instead of repeating it 4 times. For more details, please watch the entire series and in any case, refer to the official published work program. I hope this is clear. This is a very important topic, very timely. Marco, the floor is yours.
My name is Marco Fritz. Good time of the day. I will introduce a topic from Horizon Europe's work program 2021 of the destination Biodiversity and Natural Resources on transformative change for biodiversity. The first slide starts with giving a policy context for 4 topics in this destination on transformative change. Science at global level is clear that the intertwined climate and biodiversity crisis can only be successfully addressed if transformative change is happening. Relevant policies such as the EU Green Deal and the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 ask research to help in understanding the potential and the challenges of transformative change for biodiversity. At EU level, we need to understand what transformative change concretely means for biodiversity. We need approaches, tools, and knowledge to tackle indirect drivers for biodiversity loss. Science should give options to decision makers on how transformative change for biodiversity can be initiated, accelerated, and upscaled. This includes a wide array of areas to look at beyond natural sciences: social innovation, new technologies, production processes, and consumption products, and behavior changes. What is particularly important for applicants to consider is that we have published 4 topics on transformative change for biodiversity this year, and we will publish 2 further topics in the work program 2022. We clearly expect all projects to closely work together, to coordinate themselves, to come up with a critical mass of research projects to highlight the EU added value of the project outcomes so that they can guide policymakers, and to create joint processes and to produce joint deliverables where appropriate. All projects must contribute to the EU Biodiversity Knowledge Center so that the users of the deliverables, of the tools, and of the processes will find easy access there. This includes case studies on practical examples for transformative change on land and at sea. Finally, multidisciplinary research is a precondition. With a strong collaboration between social sciences and humanities, natural sciences, technologies and innovation, and to build a community who can translate the different approaches to the specific audiences. Thank you. Good time of the day. I will now go into more detail for topic which is called Quantify Impacts of the Trade in Raw and Processed Biomass on Ecosystems, for offering new leverage points for biodiversity conservation along supply chains to reduce leakage effects. The number of this topic on transformative change is Horizon CL6 2021 Biodiv 0115. This topic is a research and innovation action with a budget of 10 million euro. We expect to fund 3 projects on this topic. The expected outcomes are understanding and quantifying the impacts of a trade in raw and processed non-food biomass, which are biomass for energy, feed, fiber, textile production or carbon storage, from land and sea, on biodiversity and on ecosystem services, giving input to the bioeconomy strategy. We also want to see that it identifies new leverage points for biodiversity conservation along supply chains, within and beyond the retailing sector, reducing leakage effects, including by carbon leakage, and recommend how to address these leverage points at corporate or institutional level. The outcome should also be that there are tests of local solutions for retailers and their leverage effects on global aspects of patterns of biomass production and consumption that rebuilds our economy in a biodiversity-friendly way within planetary boundaries, including through sustainable corporate governance. And finally, improving the understanding of biodiversity interdependencies of the Sustainable Development Goals in creating knowledge which could be used by IPES and IPCC and which can translate their recommendations into practical actions. On the following slide, you find more information on the scope, which is limiting the impacts or increasing the positive effects from biomass production and consumption on biodiversity, on considering the whole trade-related value chain at the scale needed to have effect on protecting and restoring biodiversity and delivering a wide range of ecosystem services, which is relevant for the EU, on systematic approaches on activities and leakage effects at different stages in the value chain towards an ecological footprint of biomass and the manufactured goods based upon, on further research outcomes that support governments as major consumers of goods and services, so on leverage in procurement processes, and of manufacturers and retailers as consumers of primary resources. It should also integrate biodiversity values into the circular economy, cutting waste from the biomass chain, reducing leakage effects, telecoupling, using carbon and nitrogen footprints in production processes, and minimizing the use of plastics in the economy. And finally, it should show how fair and equitable development and just transitions across the EU and associated countries and globally for transition could look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this first video. As said before, I would like to encourage you to ask questions and upvote them on Slido, always preceded by the topic number if possible. This can be done even during the presentation. Slido will remain open for the whole session. The next presentation in this block, presented by Marco Fritz, is on the nexus between biodiversity, water, food, energy, transport, climate, and health. It's a very rich nexus dealt with by the scientific community at the international level. Very relevant topic as well. Please, Marco, tell us what is in this call.
Good time of the day. I will now go into more detail for the topic which is called biodiversity, water, food, energy, transport, climate, and health nexus in the context of biodiversity, of transformative change. The number of this topic is Horizon CL6 2021 Biodiv 0116. It's one of the 4 transformative change topics. This topic is a research and innovation action with a budget of 5 million euro. We expect to fund 1 project on this topic. The expected outcomes are that the interlinkages, so the nexus between climate change, biodiversity, water, food, energy, transport and health, and the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and the determining elements of transformative change are assessed. But options for change, showing which societal factors drive transformative change with a positive or negative effect on biodiversity, are identified, understood, and co-developed by the relevant actors. But it gives guidance to facilitate just transition pathways and actions illustrating how to put transformational change into action. But it creates specific narratives, business models and policies, including on nature-based solutions. But knowledge is produced and available by 2023-2024, fit for the production of the IPES assessments in a timely manner, with measures to build capacity, support policy, and science brokerage of results, including after their release dates of these assessments. And that scientists dispose of a network that facilitates and promotes research on transformational change for biodiversity across natural and social sciences. The following slide informs on the scope of this topic, which is that European research and innovation, together with a community outside academia, business, government organizations, etc., must urgently demonstrate what transformative change could actually mean and achieve for biodiversity. So it gives practical options to policymakers. But it identifies behavioral, social, cultural, economic, institutional, infrastructure, technical and technological factors in society that can stimulate or can hinder the transition. It focuses on indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, but it measures and models their impact and provide options for action. And finally, that the project critically examine the usability of the IPES conceptual framework for this transformative change and the role of biodiversity in reaching the set of the Sustainable Development Goals. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marco, for this second presentation. And we move on straight to the third topic on transformative change, which is about policy mixes, governance, and decision-making tools to help biodiversity. Marco, third presentation.
Good time of the day. I will now go into more detail for a topic which is called policy mixes, governance, including financing, and decision-making tools for transformative action for biodiversity. This is one of 4 topics on transformative change. The number of this topic is Horizon CL6 2021 Biodiv 0117. This topic is a research and innovation action with a budget of 8 million euro. We expect to fund 3 projects on this topic. The expected outcomes of this topic are tools promoting the benefits of transformative change for biodiversity are taken up by policymakers, by industries, by civil society organizations, by financing entities, by businesses and by retailers. But solutions from good practice, standards, agreements, charters, commitments, regulations, financing streams are engaging society and incorporating lifelong learning. But increased use and mainstreaming of green over grey approaches, in particular by adopting nature-based solutions, are in line with the Green Deal's do no significant harm principle. That developing and testing approaches on mitigating risks to biodiversity and on better reflecting how biodiversity loss affects business models, value chains, profitability and long-term prospects, so that methods and tools can be integrated into decisions. And finally, to factor in societal and democratic processes, which can be citizens' engagement, but also political campaigns or science denialism. The scope of this topic is detailed on the next slide. That policy mixes, governance, including financing, and decision-making tools can achieve the necessary ecological, climate, economic and social transition for biodiversity, and these are often not widely available and must be developed. That the projects take up the work of a renewed sustainable finance strategy to ensure that the financial system contributes to mitigating risks too, and to generate a positive impact on biodiversity. That it looks at promoting tax systems and pricing that reflects environmental costs to shift the tax burden from labor to pollution and to tackle environmental externalities. That proposals would look at how to further mainstream biodiversity into policy making, science and governance, including financing, to achieve transformative action. And finally, that it looks at synergies of multiple sustainable development goals to deliver biodiversity benefits, and it looks also on the role of biodiversity in reaching the set of sustainable development goals. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marco, for this third presentation on how to change the world. I hope that you have been seizing the opportunity to put your question in Slido. Now you have a few more minutes to do so, while we have the last topic of this transformative change portfolio presented again by Marco Fritz on the impact of digital and new emerging technologies on biodiversity. Marco, last presentation for now.
Good time of the day. I will now go into more detail for topic which is called Understanding the Impacts of and the Opportunities Offered by Digital Transformation, New Emerging Technologies and Social Innovation with respect to biodiversity. This topic is one of 4 on transformative change. The number of this topic is Horizon CL6 2021 Biodiv 0118. This topic is a research and innovation action with a budget of €5 million. We expect to fund 2 projects on this topic. Its expected outcomes are a better understanding of the risks and opportunities of digital and new emerging technologies that are transforming all sectors of society, with different impacts on and perceptions of biodiversity due to the speed, the scale and the level of connectivity of these transformations through social innovation. That we identify a safe operating space for accelerating and amplifying a safe, democratic and just transition, whilst protecting, restoring and sustainably using biodiversity and ecosystem services. Further outcomes should be to demonstrate the potential of social innovation and active research policy interventions to tackle biodiversity loss, including through nature-based solutions, and of active intervention by research and innovation policy and sector policies. And finally, potential users would understand and concretely apply guidance, including for monitoring, accounting and reporting purposes. The following slide informs on the scope of this topic. It should generate, collect and distribute knowledge on how to tackle the indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, which are linked to technological and social innovation, including the digital transformation. It should develop methodologies to assess the impacts of the digital divide between urban, peri-urban and rural areas, and of energy and electricity infrastructure, of digitalization on democracy and trust in science, all relating to biodiversity. It should explain how changes by technological and social innovation are impacting and giving opportunities for biodiversity, on how to mainstream biodiversity can increase benefits or avoid, mitigate or manage linked conflicts, also in relation to climate change. And finally, it should create a toolbox for stakeholders and users on the social and technological impacts of new and emerging technologies that are not covered by existing procedures for biodiversity-related risk assessments. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marco, for this fascinating presentation on a topic, really how to transform, how to change our society to reach our environmental objectives. This is a fascinating area. I would like now to open the question and answer discussion. Please, you have been putting, I hope, some questions on Slido. Don't forget to indicate the topic number. I also invite you to upvote any question you may find interesting. And I see that some questions are already appearing on the screen. We'll take them one by one. And then the colleague who presented the topic will address the question, and I can complement if need be. First question on topic 15. Should proposals address both impacts of trade of biomass on land and sea? And can they focus only on land? Marco?
Thank you for this question. The actions which are put in there are always formulated in such a way that the project should look at all of the tasks, all of the actions, and it would include land and sea. It doesn't say how big the share is, so it doesn't need to be a kind of 50 to 50% share. That is about the project to decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the next question, and sorry for the other colleague who was called Marco. I'm here calling always Marco Fritz, who is the author of the topics, along with colleagues in the co-creation that was introduced for Horizon Europe. Topic 15 again. Since Brazil is explicitly mentioned in the call, are there complementary funding mechanisms that could be explored to involve Brazilian partners? Marco?
Thank you for this question. So just to make clear that Brazil is not in the list of the low to middle income countries that can automatically receive funding from Horizon Europe. So what normally would happen that Brazilian partners, they can join consortia with their own funding, and Brazilian authorities can join the partnership and in the project and participate in that one. So what would be there is no mechanism there which would additionally allow within Horizon Europe to get additional funding. What we will do in the follow-up to this call, we will also give you a written answer that you have the security where and how you could get additional funding. But in Horizon Europe, with this call, there is no specific mechanism foreseen. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay on, Marco, because the two next questions are for you as well. How are projects supposed to cooperate with other topics mentioned in the topics text/other topics under this heading? So you gave 4 presentations, there are 4 topics, and you can let us know how the cooperation between the topics can be organized, how to show this in the proposal, please. Thank you.
Yes, that is a very important, thank you for this. That is a very important part of the application. So it's very clearly stated in the topic text that proposals should include specific tasks and allocate sufficient resources for the coordination for these measures. And that can well be already put into the application on such a level which can be decided now. What can, of course, not be decided now is which are the definite products to do so. But that could then, once the projects are working, include joint deliverables such as activities, workshop, or joint communication and outreach measures. And that should cover all the projects on transformative change related to these two biodiversity funded under this designation. The project should also look at the existing platforms and information sharing mechanisms which are relevant to promoting transformative change, and also the biodiversity knowledge sharing, so the knowledge center for biodiversity, which has been set up, could be helpful there. And furthermore, the projects are expected to cooperate with other projects which will be set up under this work program, like the European Partnership on Biodiversity and the Science Services. So all this will develop in the time of the project, but there should be from the beginning the clear budget and the clear request to have these kind of joint work already foreseen in the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. And then in the next question, we are kind of coming back to the first question that you addressed, but you could develop further if need be. In line with the question on biomass from sea, is there a need to address aquatic biodiversity, or can projects be focused on terrestrial biodiversity only?
Thank you for this question. So terrestrial means in that case, the terrestrial and freshwater, and the sea means marine part. You have a lot of biomass as well from algae, etc. Again, I reaffirm it is up to the projects to define which share we should give to each of them. But as it is a clear request in the call, we should at least have a specific part on the marine biomass as well. Thank you.
So it seems that there were only questions on topic 15 for this and for the block of presentation, and that there are no more questions that need to be addressed now. If you have additional questions, you can always send them as proposed before. And I propose here, here there's a new question, sorry. If I'm not Montagen, 16 of 21 topics want collaboration with the Biodiversity Partnership. Are any resources foreseen on the side of the P5 for this? So this is a bit cryptic for me. Is it for Josefina or Marco, or both?
I think it could be for me. Because it's mentioned in the partnership. We could address it later on. We are talking about the partnership in the second part of today. Short answer is yes, there will be resources in the partnership for that. And no, there should be some resources foreseen within the projects as well. But we can talk about this in the second part when we are focusing on the partnership. And I think there was this word corrector, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, this has been edited.
I thought, okay, maybe I didn't know who that famous person with a capital M was, and I didn't want to show my ignorance. But now it's correct. Thank you, and we will address this in the partnership discussion. Thank you. So then, I think we can close this Q&A session for now, and I will pass the floor to my colleague Anne Birrell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Indeed, now we're going to be moving on to a new heading. This is the heading on interconnecting biodiversity research and supporting policies. Of course, all of the topics we've already heard do eventually support policies, but this block of topics have that as a very direct and explicit objective. So I would now like to invite you to listen to a series of 4 topic presentations under this heading. And after we hear the 4 presentations, we will once again open a Q&A session through Slido. So please feel free to introduce your questions as we go along. The first topic, presented again by Marco Fritz, is about science service.
My name is Marco Fritz. Good time of the day. I will introduce now a topic from Horizon Europe's Work Programme 2021 in Destination Biodiversity and Natural Resources. I will present the topic, which is called A Mechanism for Science to Inform Implementation, Monitoring, Review and Ratcheting Up of a New EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. In short, Science Service. This is topic Horizon CL6 2021 BioDiff 0119. This topic is a coordination and support action. With a budget of 13 million euro, we expect to fund one project for delivering this science service. The first slide informs on the policy context. What we need is a flexible, lean mechanism working in line with a time frame for policy processes, connecting up biodiversity research across Europe. This science service should support EU policies by generating knowledge, guiding biodiversity governance and ecosystem monitoring, and work along the development of a long-term strategic research agenda for biodiversity, which we will set up in the next years. With that, the science service contributes to the European Green Deal and to the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 in particular. In fact, its major task is to inject science input into the implementation of a biodiversity strategy and mobilize these institutions, people, stakeholders who are responsible for working on deploying a biodiversity strategy and policies which are relevant for biodiversity to request research and innovation for knowledge, advice, and the tools needed to do so. This science service should and could at EU level pilot, test and lead the way on how any science component could work in practice in the context of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Expected outcomes of this project are linking European research and biodiversity policy making that will be embedded in the EU Knowledge Centre for Biodiversity as its scientific pillar that collects and organizes science for biodiversity, in particular knowledge generated from EU-funded research and innovation projects, research infrastructure, or platforms. It should regularly feed into monitoring, report, and review of the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 with relevant research-based assessments and options that can feed into any short and medium-term corrective action if necessary, complementing further EU-funded initiatives. It should fully integrate science into the governance framework of the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 to steer science-based implementation of biodiversity policy, which is agreed at various levels. It should set up a functional, early delivering science service at EU level, also involving associated countries where appropriate, to bolster ambitions for research into biodiversity relevant areas, and this over the whole duration of Horizon Europe. The next slide informs on the scope of a science service. We expect it to orchestrate the input of science on biodiversity and prioritize requests from policy to research. It should provide relevant policy tools, such as indicators, generate knowledge to fill priority gaps, synthesize knowledge, and communicate emerging issues. It should build capacity within and beyond the EU for the EU decision-making process defined under clear governance arrangements. The science service should use the tools and results funded by the EU Research Framework Programme, including through its partnerships and missions, organizing ad hoc high-level expert advice to the European Commission's high-level decision makers, and also act as a back office for organizing the cooperation amongst all biodiversity relevant research projects from Horizon Europe. It should deliver, communicate, and disseminate regular, such as half-yearly input for implementing the biodiversity strategy. The aim must be to trigger response from those entities responsible for implementing the strategy, such as EU services, national and local authorities, businesses, civil society, and the environmental knowledge community in general. It acts therefore as a kind of umbrella for similar tools and services. What is important to know that this service has up to 30% of its budget as a financial support to third parties. And this could be used to provide, on the request of its governance bodies, summaries, knowledge synthesis, fact sheets or briefs and reviews of biodiversity research outputs and tools, which are usable for implementing and ratcheting up the EU biodiversity strategy in the language and format tailored to the target users. What is important to know when applying for the science service? The concept behind this is that this science service should become the machinery which connects research to policy and policy to research within the EU on biodiversity. It organizes rather the science than producing it himself. It should be a key element of a biodiversity knowledge center. And as this biodiversity knowledge center is hosted by the Joint Research Center of the Commission, the JRC may participate as member of a consortium selected for funding. It will join it after the selection of a consortium has been done. What is very important that the science service doesn't reinvent the wheel. It should capitalize on the results of the past and cooperate with ongoing research projects. We have very good mechanisms already working in Europe, which are already around, which the science service should use for delivering its function. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Marco, for your presentation on the science service. Without further ado, I think we can move right on to the next topic, which will also be presented by Marco, and this is about supporting the IPES and the IPCC processes. Over to you, Marco.
Good time of the day. My name is Marco Fritz. You will hear now from me an introduction to a topic from Horizon Europe's Work Programme 2021, which is in the destination Biodiversity and Natural Resources. I will present the topic, which is called Support to Processes Triggered by IPES and IPCC, with the number Horizon CL6 2021 BioDev 120. This topic is a coordination and support action with a budget of €5 million, and we expect to fund one project. The first slide informs you on the policy context. The policy context is that the European Green Deal, the European Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, and the climate policy emphasize the role of science for addressing the intertwined biodiversity and climate crisis. And science policy interfaces on biodiversity have made good progress, but must be stepped up to achieve targeted impacts on biodiversity relevant policies that can in turn be used as structured policy input into the research cycle. So with that, the EU increases its support to IPES, which is the intergovernmental science policy platform for biodiversity and ecosystem services, to bring it up to the same level as the IPCC, who does the same work for climate change. We want to strengthen the cooperation between the panel and the platform, support for scientists, for EU policymakers, and facilitate the uptake of deliverables of IPES and IPCC. On the expected outcomes, what we would like this project to deliver is that EU projects and initiatives are aware of and use the knowledge generation, policy support, and capacity building functions of IPES, including the recommendations issued by its task forces. That is valid for IPES and for IPCC. We also want that synergies and cooperation between IPES and IPCC are intensified between the researchers, but also to look how both could work with multilateral environmental agreements and other research communities beyond the EU. We also would like to resolve shortcomings in the uptake of IPES and IPCC findings and conclusions in sectorial policy making, also in others than for biodiversity and in business decisions. And finally, we would like that this project translates outcomes of IPES into options for better protecting and restoring biodiversity and ecosystem services at European, national and local level. The next slide will inform you about scope. It will be, what we want is that projects provide assistance to the EU and associated countries, also to Central Asian and African researchers, knowledge holders and local communities, for that they can get better input into IPES and IPCC. We would like the networking between the scientific disciplines relevant to IPES and IPCC, between the social sciences and humanities, and technology and mathematics and environmental sciences becomes much better, and we have interdisciplinary work teams. We would like that the project translates IPES output into EU languages, which is targeted to a wider readership by the EU public, interest groups, research and innovation projects, policymakers and businesses. But further, it proposes standards for EU-funded biodiversity projects to apply the relevant work of the IPES data and knowledge task forces. And finally, that it supports European negotiators at IPES plenary meetings and in the intersessional work, that it gives back office support to improve the level of coherence in how the EU and associated countries give input to both the Convention on Biological Diversity and IPES processes. What is important to know about this project is that the results should clearly be integrated and contribute to the EU Biodiversity Knowledge Center. We would like that it cooperates with other projects, and it capitalizes on the results of past and ongoing research projects. Many thanks.
Thank you once again, Marco. The third topic, which Marco again will be presenting, is on the impact of business on biodiversity. This is an important topic because we all know that we need to work in partnership to solve the biodiversity crisis, and business certainly has a role to play. As I mentioned before, I would encourage you to put your questions into Slido as we go along, or to upvote questions which other people have already asked. Make sure you always start your question with the topic number, please. Over to you, Marco.
My name is Marco Fritz. Good time of the day. You will hear from me now an introduction to a topic from Horizon Europe's Work Programme 2021 in the destination Biodiversity and Natural Resources. I will present a topic on impact and dependence of business on biodiversity, which is topic Horizon CL6 2021 BioDiv 1021. This topic is a research and innovation action with a budget of €5 million, and we expect to fund 2 projects which should closely work together with joint deliverables where adequate. The first slide informs on the policy context. Science, as it has been produced by IPES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the policy which is fixed in the EU Green Deal and the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, ask us for understanding the potential and challenges of integrating biodiversity into business decisions. This topic therefore aims to support the development of policies, business decisions, and knowledge generation to accelerate biodiversity-relevant transformative changes in businesses and our society. This could improve public health and well-being and tackle inequalities, create new jobs, sustainable growth in rural, post-industrial and coastal areas. It could strengthen resilience against environmental and climate stressors and minimize risks related to the loss of biodiversity linked to business activities. Expected outcomes of this project are a better understanding and awareness of how businesses depend and impact upon biodiversity and ecosystem services, also based on practical business experience by private companies to feed into business decision-making. We would like to see integrate biodiversity into corporate decision-making and business resilience and to minimize investment risk. also to making knowledge in time available through meta-studies, publication, for the production of the IPES methodological assessment on business and biodiversity, which is planned to be adopted by IPES in 2024-2025. And finally, putting in place capacity building, policy support, and science brokerage of the projects, including after the release dates of the IPES assessment through effective and impactful dissemination. The second slide informs on the scope, which is identifying criteria and indicators and developing a toolbox for measuring dependence, impact, and contribution of business to the recovery of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Developing methods to reduce adverse impacts and related material and reputational risks for business sectors beyond those who directly depend upon specific ecosystem services. It is on assessing the broader impact of businesses on biodiversity, the cumulative impact and the indirect impact from supply chains, trade or substitution effects, such as telecoupling. We also would like to see collating targets and regulation that stimulate innovation, generating a positive impact on biodiversity, and the decoupling of environmental pressures from increased output. Promoting biodiversity-friendly business cases and public accountability, informing regulatory agencies, guiding financial investments, and influencing producer, retailer, and consumer behavior, and analyzing the added value of creating a Horizon Europe prize for innovative businesses focused on nature-based solutions. What is important when setting up consortia for this project? We would like that this project contributes to the EU Biodiversity Knowledge Center with its deliverables, directly feeding into it, that it collaborates with other projects which are relevant on business and biodiversity, which very much capitalizes on the results of past and ongoing research projects and structures and tools which are already available, that it takes big importance on multidisciplinary research together with practitioners, that it produces case studies which can serve as practical example, and finally that it produces timely input into IPES processes, that the results of this project can be taken up by IPES assessments. Many thanks.
Thank you very much once again, Marco, and we'll let you have a little rest now. The last topic in this series, and in fact the last topic in today's session, will now be presented by Josefina Envedake, and it's about the European Biodiversity Partnership. As mentioned before, this topic is a call on its own with a separate deadline. It's worth noticing that the Biodiversity Partnership is a very important action mentioned in the EU Biodiversity Strategy. The budget allocated for this work in this 2021-2022 work program is €40 million. This will cover the first 2 years of the partnership's co-funded calls and activities, notably for biodiversity monitoring. This is only part of the overall budget, which you will see in the work program. There's the figure mentioned of €165 million. That amount corresponds to, in fact, about 30% of the total budget, which is going to be mobilized by the partnership. So over to you, Josefina, for more information on this call.
This is a special topic, the European Partnership Rescuing Biodiversity to Safeguard Life on Earth. And this is a program co-fund action. The policy context is that the Biodiversity Partnership is an action included in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. So it is really into the priorities for the Green Deal. It is about coordinating research programs between the EU, its member states, and associated countries. It also serves the Birds and Habitat Directives, EU climate and agricultural policies, and the Global 2050 vision from the Convention on Biological Diversity, Living in Harmony with Nature. among other things, net zero ecosystem loss by 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals 13, 14, 15, and 17. So it's a very big project. The expected outcomes basically is that research and environmental policy institutions build up together coherent initiatives through this co-funded European partnership. This is not a normal research and innovation project. This is about national, local, and EU research and innovation programs sharing information and resources in kind and in cash with environmental ministries and agencies with a biodiversity strategic agenda, which will develop into a long-term pan-European agenda, co-created and implemented. It's also about structuring biodiversity monitoring in Europe in the form of a network of coordinated observatories providing accessible knowledge to users. It's also about increasing the impact and the visibility of research and innovation and the European leadership in tackling the biodiversity crisis. Biodiversity should be mainstreamed across sectors and policies across Europe. Nature capital accounting and nature-based solutions will be some of the tools that will be promoted. This is about a summary of the expected outcomes of this partnership. In the next slide, we can see the scope. The Biodiversity Partnership should support the contribution of research and innovation to the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030 to enable transformative change, to put biodiversity on the path to recovery by 2030 for the benefit of the climate and people. And it should have a number of overarching objectives. As you can imagine, these are programs, research programs, so the objectives will be a myriad, but the overarching ones would be produce actionable knowledge to tackle direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, expand the evidence base, the development and the deployment of nature-based solutions, make the business case for biodiversity and conservation and restoration of ecosystems, improve the monitoring of biodiversity and ecosystem services across Europe, give science-based support, not only for the EU, but also for member states and associated countries, and launching ambitious joint calls to fund transnational projects, running mobility schemes, building capacity, and increasing impact. The indicative budget for the European Partnership on Biodiversity has been estimated in more than 500 million euro from member states and associated countries, and the EU contribution has been estimated in 165 million euro. For this work program, this topic is about 40 million euro. It's very important to take into account that this is a project that will give support to third parties, will fund other projects. It has to have synergies with the EC Knowledge Center for Biodiversity, with the Europa Bond project that is actually developing the framework for monitoring, with the Future Science Service, other partnerships and the missions. Social science and humanities need to be included, and if there is a use of satellite systems, the European ones should be preferred, like Copernicus, Galileo, or EGNOS. International cooperation is very important, and it's also important that this partnership will contribute to international conventions and to IPES. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josefina. So we have now come to the end of the presentations, and we will now be opening up the Q&A session. I see that there are already some questions that have been posted in Slido, but if you still have other questions, please do put them into Slido, and we will try to answer them. So if I look at the questions, the first question is, shouldn't the Science Service be an official organization in the EU, like, for example, in the JRC, even a part of the Knowledge Center? So I think that's for you, Marco.
I do believe so as well. Many thanks for his question. So indeed, the Science Service should feed into the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity. And that Knowledge Center is hosted by the JRC, and this should be explicit in the proposal. What we do with having such a project, we tap into the mobilizing and flexibility possibilities of science policy consortia to start and develop this service, which will then complement the possibilities of the official organization within the EU. So this is the way how both are working with each other. You might also watch out at the Biodiversity Research webpage, where applicants will find more information on the general objective of a science service for research and policies. And we will also include this into the information visible on the Q&A documentation at the tenders portal. Many thanks.
Thanks, Marco. I see the third question on the screen is actually somewhat related, so maybe we'll move to that. The question is whether the applicants should contact the JRC while preparing the proposals.
Yes, thank you. And on that one, I will give a short introduction again. We had this yesterday as well. So how the cooperation with the JRC works. So if the applicants intend to collaborate with the JRC, they must envisage in their proposal the JRC's possible contribution. And this is all based on the topic text. And this topic text on the science service clearly refers to the importance to work together with the JRC. The JRC, however, will not participate in the preparation and the submission of a proposal. And then after the evaluation process, the JRC and the consortium selected for funding might come to an agreement on the specific terms of a participation of a JRC. The JRC would then accede to the grant agreement as a beneficiary requesting zero funding and would accede to the consortium as a member. So in that sense, it's not mandatory to contact the JRC during the preparation phase. That is very much up to the consortia whether they wish to do so, as there should be an explicit reference to the foreseen coordination with the Knowledge Center on Biodiversity in the proposal. If the JRC is contacted, the JRC will need to assure, of course, that all the other applicants receive the same information as these consortia will have contacted the JRC will receive from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. That's very clear. I see there is a question here next about the involvement of third countries. In particular, the question is, since there are many migrant species, what's the rationale to exclude third countries from the CSA, as third countries are excluded from all CSAs? Could you help us with that, Marco?
Yes. That is, indeed, it's a formal question that we have a CSA, so it doesn't mean that the topic which are covered from the science service are not covering.
Okay, we seem to have lost Marco. We seem to have lost Marco, and I'm not sure how stable my connection is either, but I hope you can still hear me. Okay, very good. So maybe we can look at some of the other questions, and while Marco is trying to re-establish his connection, perhaps Josefina could take a look at the question on the biodiversity partnership. There's a question there: what's the total budget available for the first calls 2021 of the biodiversity partnership? Josefina.
This is a good question because it's a complex issue. The budget of the Biodiversity Partnership, as was not really well explained in the video, and yes, the total budget it's more than 500 million euro, but this includes EU and member states' participation. Then in the EU contribution, we have 165 estimated, which corresponds to 30% of the total budget. And from these 165, we have allocated 40 million for the first 2 years. But then in the first 2 years, the partnership is going to launch 2 calls, one in 2021 on biodiversity preservation, and one in 2022 on monitoring, biodiversity monitoring. And they, with the 40 million I hope it lasts for 40 million years, but the 40 million euro from the Commission, they top up with twice more from the member states, and then they distribute not only for calls, but also for other number of activities. The first call that is going to be launched in October, it's going, I think, today has been pre-announced, and the budget is 40 million euro, which by coincidence is the same amount that the EU is giving, but it's not all EU contribution. So 1/3 of that will be from the EU, and the rest is pledged by the 33 countries that are already in the partnership. So we expect a big call. It's actually twice the size of the usual calls that Biodiversity has been doing in the last 10 years. So 40 million euro for biodiversity preservation in the beginning of October. Please check your national funding agencies, because the announcements are going to be there, and also in the Biodiversa website. Thank you.
Thank you, Josefina. Well, I certainly hope that we'll find some way to address the biodiversity crisis in less than 40 million years, but we'll see. I see we have Marco back with us now. So I'm not sure that everyone heard all of your answers to the question on third countries. So could you please come back on that question again?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was for some reason rejected from this. So the rules for the coordination and support actions apply, of course, for this topic as for all others. And this topic of a science service is indeed the EU biodiversity strategy. If you look at the EU biodiversity strategy, there is also a huge part dedicated to actions which would cover actions beyond the EU territory. So if you look at migratory species, for example, that is very much in line with the EU policies. So content-wise, of course, if policymakers ask the Science Service to cover also third countries in their question, and a lot of biodiversity questions go beyond the EU, then this is fully fine. But this is on the content what the Science Service will deliver. So on the coordination support action as such in the consortia, these rules apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. We seem to have another question on the Science Service, and that is, how can you or should the applicant guarantee the long lifetime of the Science Service? Could you tell us about that, please, Marco?
Thank you for that question. So the long lifetime of the Science Service, it is absolutely to the consortia to define how long the Science Service could work. Possibly not the 40 million euros, which Josefina has said, but joke apart, it is in the responsibility of the consortia. The description of the call clearly says that it should develop and start the Science Service to work on a longer time frame. And when it is very much in how this Science Service works, what will be in the midterm and at the end of the Science Service duration, how it could be developed longer, whether it will be a self-standing tool, or whether it will be integrated in the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity totally, or whether there will be any other solution to be funded and found for the further development of the service. This is very much in the responsibility of a consortia, as far as they can do already now, to give an idea what could be done in the mid and long term with this Science Service. Many thanks.
Okay, many thanks to you, Marco. Now, the next question I think is a little more of a horizontal question. It doesn't have any specific topic on. It says, how should they indicate collaboration with other projects in the proposal? Would this be about sharing results or joining other project communication channels or other things? I suppose that's for you, Marco, but I don't know if Josefina would also want to say something. Anyway, maybe you can start.
Thank you. And so the cooperation with other projects, as has been said before already, which is really in the description, there should be, first of all, resources foreseen for this joint cooperation with other projects that could, for coordination measures. So, and that could then, in agreement with the other projects, become joint deliverables, for example, on activities, on workshops, and joint communication and outreach measures. The projects could also use, we have a number of existing platforms and information sharing mechanisms which are relevant to these projects, and they should use that and should use that together. We have finally, of course, I come again to the Knowledge Center for Biodiversity, who could help to collect all of the project deliverables together. But of course, we cannot foresee yet is how this will develop, because we ask the projects which will start to work together. They might find one of the things which a project applicants can do. They could contact already existing projects which are working on nature-based solutions, because there we have applied the same methodology, that they would need to work together and produce in common in the portfolio of the nature-based solutions ways of making common deliverables and common actions. So very clearly the idea behind is that we have a much bigger impact if the projects work together instead of each of the projects developing their own little tool for issues which are somehow crossing over about all topics. Josefina might want to complement. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Perhaps Josefina would want to say a bit more, including to elaborate on the question that was raised before about the link between the partnership and other projects. Josefina?
Yes, indeed, this is very much linked with the previous question. In 16 out of our 21 topics in biodiversity, we are asking projects to collaborate with the biodiversity partnership. And thank you for this counting. We hadn't counted them. And in many others, some of them, we are also asking the collaboration with the science service and with other projects, ongoing projects, as Marco just said, or projects in this same call. And yes, the resources should come from both sides. The partnership is putting resources for this collaboration. As I said, they are not only funding calls, they are also organizing other kinds of activities, such as workshops, such as even subcontracting parts of the actions to projects or other institutions. But part of these resources should come also from the proposals in the different topics, because collaboration is a very nice word. Everybody says it's very nice to put in the proposal, we will collaborate, but the evaluators are going to judge if this has the appropriate resources. It's not only about human resources or budget. Is about the adequacy of the sentences, of the things that you propose for collaborating. I know it's very difficult. You need to talk to the other projects, to the other consortia later on when everybody has been funded, not only the partnership but the others. But you can already start imagining these kind of common deliverables or common mechanisms, because it's not only downstream, not only about communicating results and to discuss together, is also reflecting together on common issues and how to give something coordinated. In the partnership case, it's very important because it's an overall program. And the strategic agenda covers most of the biodiversity field, as much as we do in the Horizon Europe programs. So to avoid parallel streams of work or duplications, we really need to coordinate early on and to devote the resources, and this needs to be clear in your proposals. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Josefina. I think that this is a very important question. And I think there's also been a mention of the importance of linking to the work the JRC and its knowledge center. So maybe we could also mention how that could work. Marco, maybe you're best placed to answer that?
Thank you. And indeed, so the Knowledge Center is, of course, a very specific and very important part of his cooperation and collaboration. And we have it in all of the topics, and in particular on the science service. So a very practical tip for you. As for all when you look into the topic descriptions of all the projects and information mechanisms, you have all of them have web pages where you can contact them, and that is what I would certainly do when they are named. For a Knowledge Center, for example, there's also a web page, and the applicants should just go to that page, scroll down, and ask to feedback to the Knowledge Center, so they then can start the communication with them. So really, I would really encourage to use the web tools which are there for getting in contact with the different organizations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marcos. So if I look at the Slido screen, I see we still have one unanswered question, and that's a follow-up on the earlier question, I think, on funding of Brazilian partners. The question is, will we find information in the submission portal, or where will it be available? I think, Josefina, you're probably best placed to answer that, no?
Actually, our friends in REA are the best place to answer that, but they have passed me some information. Yes, there is information in the participants portal, but I'd like to say that bilateral cooperation with Brazil and the EU is already organized in the form of administrative arrangements. There is one to be signed in 2021. You can find information in the Europa website. You simply Google Brazil Horizon Europe, and you will find a page for these mechanisms of co-funding. And because biodiversity is one of the current priorities for this bilateral cooperation, participants who wish to apply in the consortia for Horizon Europe can already start contacting their own Brazilian states funding agencies under the coordination of CONFAB and their National Council for Scientific and Technological Development to seek funding for their participation in the EU research and innovation programs. As I said, the next agreement is going to be signed in 2021, so on time for, I assure, the participation of the projects that will be evaluated this autumn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josefina. And thank you, both of you, Marco and Josefina, for your informative presentations and for the detailed answers that you've given to the questions. At the same time, I'd like to thank the audience for their interest, for attending the session, and for asking your questions. Hopefully, we've now left you with lots of clarity, but if you still have further questions, as we mentioned at the beginning, you can send those after the info days through the Research Inquiry Service. You can also consult the frequently asked questions page or contact your national contact point for more guidance. So we're now coming to the end of this session. We wish you the best of luck in your preparation and your proposals, and we look forward to receiving them. Thank you.